Welcome to episode 1 of Project 250, a weekly chronicle of the people, places, and events of the American Revolution, in the order they occurred. So, without further ado, here's what was happening 250 years ago this week, January 1st to 7th, 1775. We begin in London, where England's King George III is facing what is perhaps the greatest crisis of his reign. Arguably the most powerful monarch of his time, George III rules an empire that truly spans the globe. In addition to his possessions in North America, which comprise everything east of the Mississippi River, including the 13 colonies, and Canada, George's overseas possessions include the islands of Bermuda, Barbados, Antigua, the Bahamas, and Jamaica, parts of India and the East Indies, the Falklands, St. Helena, and Gibraltar, to name a few. Now, after almost a decade and a half on the throne, George III faces the daunting prospect of the ongoing colonial dispute, which began as an argument over taxes and colonial rights, now threatening to boil over into open rebellion. Advising the king and the man primarily responsible for colonial policy is his Prime Minister Lord Frederick North. Together, during the coming year, the decisions made by these two men and their response to the current imperial crisis will determine the fate not only of Britain and her empire but of the entire world for the next 2.5 centuries and beyond. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the growing likelihood of conflict with England was causing great concern to the king's North American subjects, especially those in Massachusetts, still reeling from the effects of the Boston Port Act. In Cambridge, wealthy matron Hannah Winthrop writes to her friend Mercy Otis Warren, expressing her concerns over the worsening crisis and the devastating economic and social impact of the king's policy of coercion. Hannah, whose husband John was descended from Massachusetts's founder, expressed hope that Mercy's husband, James Warren, and his colleagues in the Massachusetts Provincial Congress would persevere in their effort to resist British oppression. She also expressed her fear of the consequences of failure.
I much fear that if his spirits should fail, it will give our enemies reason for triumph, as they take every occasion and are indefatigable in their endeavors and lay hold like drowning men of the least shadow of a shade to prejudice the cause of liberty and to calumniate the supporters of it.
Meanwhile, Bostonians weren't the only ones feeling the pinch. George Washington, one of Virginia's largest landowners and slaveholders, is playing host to Charles Lee, a former British officer and thorn in the side of just about everyone who ever met him. Like Washington, Lee was a French and Indian War veteran. Both men had served in General Edward Braddock's disastrous 1755 expedition to the forks of the Ohio. The haughty Lee, who never traveled without his beloved dogs, often remarked that he preferred the company of dogs to that of humans. For the dutiful Washington, who, like many planters, often found himself short of cash, hosting the overbearing Lee must have seemed an undue burden. This was particularly true since Washington, together with his neighbor, George Mason, had recently devoted large sums of money to bolstering the local, Fairfax County, militia company. To make matters worse, Lee ended his week-long stay at Mount Vernon by hitting his host up for a loan of £15, presumably for traveling expenses to Williamsburg, a sizable amount at the time which could only have worsened Washington's financial woes. On January 5, the New York Journal reported that, in accordance with the King's Order in Council of October 1774, which prohibited arms exports to the colonies, 2 British men-of-war had been ordered to the Dutch island of Texel, the largest and most populated island in the West Frisian Islands. The presence of the British ships was intended to prevent the transport of such arms on English vessels to America. We end the week in Salem County, New Jersey, where amid growing tensions with England, the local Committee of Observation approves a petition urging neighbouring counties to establish committees of observation and a committee of correspondence. And that's the way it was 250 years ago this week. If you enjoyed this video, please tell a friend. Also, if you like what you see, be sure to like, share and subscribe. You can also check us out on Facebook and Twitter or X, or whatever they're calling themselves these days. Thank you for watching.